Welcome to War Room Pandemic. It's episode 5. We're live from Capitol Hill on, I think, the hottest show in podcast land, because this thing's on fire right now. And the reason is that we stay ahead of the story. We started last Saturday, and if you listened to the show last Saturday, you would have heard what the chairman of the Federal Reserve said yesterday, that this is going to have a major impact on the economy of China, which has now become the global logistics center, the global just-in-time component of the world global economy. And we're going to unpack all that. We're going to do the detailed analysis. I'm joined by the head of the War Room Analytical Department, Jack Maxey. By the way, Jack Maxey had a star turn yesterday on Steve Cortez's show out in Chicago. Cortez really said, hey, the best guest he's had on his show since that show launched. And honored to be joined in studio now by Dr. Stephen Hatfill. Dr. Hatfill is the author of 3 Seconds Until Midnight. You can get it up on Amazon, but we're going to be talking about Dr. Hatfill the next couple of days about how we actually get this book out everywhere. It's a must-read. It tells you everything you need to know. Dr. Hatfill was a researcher, a biodefense researcher at the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, which is kind of the gold standard of what this is. He's now an adjunct professor at George Washington University in immunology, microbiology. And just a overall guy that really knows, that understands this at an incredibly deep level, both what the United States has to do to protect itself, but more importantly, exactly what are we talking about? The reason I decided to do this show and started last Saturday to get ahead of this is that I've had a pretty good track record of seeing over the hill, as Wellington used to say, about what is going to be important, what is going to be big, whether that's populism or nationalism or what these giant, huge, massive forces that drive the modern world. And I knew right away, given all the years that I've spent on this China situation, and given the fact that I'm now considered the head of the super hawks about the Chinese Communist Party. And one of the reasons I am is that the Chinese people, having been in China and around China since 1977 as a young naval officer on a destroyer in the 7th Fleet in the South China Sea, have a great love and affinity for the Chinese people, have a great love for China. I've lived there for a while. Fantastic people, and I just absolutely abhor the dictatorship that controls them. And here's the reason, is that they are liars. They're gangsters. And everything they say is a lie. Everything they say about the Hong Kong deal was a lie. Everything they said about a deal they did with President Obama and Joe Biden in, I think, the Rose Garden in 2014 or 15, when they lied about cyber intrusions, when they lied about the militarization of the South China Sea, everything they did on the Paris deal, the one the president got out of, they lied about everything. We now realize this is the Financial Times of London reporting this, that they've got $500 billion of coal-fired plants they're building. Everything they've said is a lie. Okay, and Dr. Bradley Thayer is going to be joining us in the second half of the show by phone. Dr. Thayer and Lian-Chan Han, who's one of the top guys on China, wrote this amazing piece that came out Monday. We previewed it on the first show when they had him on about that this is the biological Chernobyl of the Chinese Communist Party. And why is it equivalent to Chernobyl? And if you watch the HBO special, you understand. The Soviet Union, it was its incompetence that brought it on, but most importantly, the regime just cares about protecting the control of information to protect themselves. They don't care about the safety. They don't care about the security of people. You're seeing the exact same thing here. As we're going to get into with Dr. Hatfill, this thing came about in December 1st, or maybe even beforehand. And it was only because of pressure put on by this show, but by many other people, that really got them to step up to the plate in the last week of January to actually now step forward and call it, a devil or demon or whatever. And we're going to get into all that. I want to go to Dr. Hatfill because one thing I want to do is kind of set, so people have a framework. They can start to think about this. One of the things we try to do in impeachment and here in War Room Pandemic is separate out the signal from the noise. The signal from the noise. What's really important versus all that kind of fog of war stuff that comes up. And you're going to be seeing this daily as you see now these news reports. The mainstream media is gearing up on this. Much of this is misinformation from the Chinese Communist Party that's just propounded day in and day out by the lazy, corrupt, and incompetent mainstream media that has never really figured out about what the Chinese Communist Party is doing as an existential threat to the United States of America. And this is, by the way, to I think, help the Chinese people, because they are the ones that this is being visited on, and it's going to be horrific. I want to go back in time. A couple of things you've said on the show the weeks, and I want to start this thing off about historically, we've had some horrific pandemics in history. I think you've mentioned three: the Justinian pandemic in the Roman Empire,
Yes.
The Black Plague in the Middle Ages, the bubonic plague, and then the Spanish pandemic, the flu, which you really go into a detailed analysis in 3 seconds until midnight. Walk us through those three first, and what caused them, what drove them, why were they so horrific in eviscerating the human race?
Whenever you take a disease out of its natural biological area and you disseminate it into a new geographical area with new people,
Right.
You can expect unusual severity. We believe the Justinian plague came up out of Ethiopia. The Romans, Constantinople, it was importing everything, massive trade all over the known world, and they brought something home. We do the same. When the first Spanish explorers explored South America, the common colds, smallpox, which there's some European resistance to, decimated the native Indian populations, the indigenous people. Well, it works both ways. So, outrageous. The same thing had happened actually before, but it was when we were still city-states, the plague of Athens in the BC era.
In the Peloponnesian War.
The Peloponnesian War,
Yep.
yes, sir. So the second one, the Black Death, appeared to come out of the stands, the steppes.
But this is about
Central Asia.
this is about China trade. This is Marco Polo
Yes.
open up the
Yeah, oh,
trade
yeah.
routes and
that's what disseminated it.
and through the stands, through the
original Belt and Road.
original Belt and
Yes.
Road, which was the Great Silk
Yes.
Road, right? They still call it the Silk Road to today in Kazakhstan and other places. Through the stands
Yes.
came a plague, either off a rat or fleas off a rat. We ascertained
Yeah,
what it
we've
is?
added lice to that.
Lice,
Human
right?
lice.
Lice, and that the bubonic plague. How horrific was that as far as the human population?
Oh, in London it killed half the population.
Half the population of London. So people should remember, this is both situations in Constantinople during the Roman Empire and in the bubonic plague.
Yeah.
Is because of the globalization at the time.
Yes,
It's not that
absolutely.
globalization is bad. Globalization obviously makes trade, you make communication, you do all that. But there's a dark side to it. There's an unknown side to it, right? But you see this in the globalization of the exploration,
Yes.
right? Of the Spanish exploration and others here in North America, and think the indigenous population wasn't immune to these diseases that the European population was, and that's where you saw the evisceration either through smallpox or all of this. And let's go to 1918. Then we have this horrific war, right, that kills, 25, 30, 40, 50 million people, principally from the Dardanelles and Gallipoli all the way up through the Middle East, Lawrence of Arabia, and the Western Front.
Right.
But the real killer came at the end of the war.
It came around about the U.S. entry into the war. President Wilson had avoided ground operations by U.S. forces through most of, and then suddenly there was a change of heart. And now suddenly our small standing military forces had to rapidly expand. So there were about 12 major cantonment places built for recruit training, and they initiated the draft. We're talking thousands and thousands of fit young men overcrowded into these camps. And
A lot of this would come from rural populations too that were not used to high population density.
Yeah, population density is critical here. In any epidemic, there's the seed, which is the pathogenic agent, the virus or bacteria. But it has to have the right soil, and that's the political social background. In this case, it was the U.S. entry into the war. The disease had broken out a few months earlier in Haskell County in Kansas. This seems to be the most rational explanation. And there's several good books out there on this that we reference in our book. Brilliant research, brilliant, absolutely. Took them years. And a few people got sick. It's a rural community. a few cows, chickens, whatever. But it looked like it jumped from the bird. Influenza is a bird disease. It's not the common cold.
On a comparative basis, what was the number of dead who we lost in the actual war versus we lost in terms of the recruits? Because I know it swept through a lot of the army camps.
Well, what happened on this first wave, and this is something to keep important, relevant to what we're seeing now with the coronavirus. The influenza came through the world in 3 waves. The first wave was highly infectious. It was winter cold, dehumidified atmosphere, perfect conditions for airborne transmission of a virus.
What do you mean dehumidified atmosphere?
Low water vapor. Water is a universal solvent. It creates osmotic pressure on the outer structure of the virus. In biological warfare, this is something that has to be overcome if you're using this for evil purposes. But Mother Nature, when you cough, you generate a very small number of 1 to 5 micron particles. They're invisible. You can't see them.
Right.
But they're surrounded by mucus, which acts as a bit of a protective barrier. And they'll float around the atmosphere for several hours, maintaining infectivity. You don't know they're there. You walk into the room, you inhale it. Or they deposit on surfaces. Your mucous membranes are very key sites for influenza entry and coronavirus, I'm estimating. So you touch the elevator button that somebody's coughed in there, and you put droplets on it, and then you rub your eye,
And
you touch your nose. Within 20 minutes, that virus, because your tears drain through a nasolacrimal duct, within about 20 minutes, that virus is in your nasopharynx. And we do this with ferrets all the time. Ferrets are the animal model for influenza.
In the waves, you had 3 waves.
3 waves.
Let's go. I want to walk back through those waves because there's analogy, I think, here in
Yes.
this, to the modern, to what we're talking about, the Wuhan pandemic. Let's go back to those 3 waves.
The first wave came in, broke out in the cantonment camps in the United States.
Even before we'd shipped overseas.
Yeah.
So called the Spanish influenza is a little bit of a misnomer.
It's a misnomer.
That came later. It started in, we believe now, Haskell, Kansas, in the typical kind of, the bird to the human transfer.
There's some other theories that it was caused by Chinese laborers brought over. The theory, from looking at all the data that I believe in and some other scientists, is that it was Haskell County. The doctor at the time, and this is horse and buggy doctors,
Right.
that would actually come by the house, and he'd never seen anything like this. The severity and the extreme spread. And he actually wrote to the public health authorities a letter, and this seems to be sort of the first description that something odd was coming out, looking back historically.
Great clinician, really.
Oh yeah, he was. And
So what, the first
so
wave
it broke
was that.
out in
Yeah.
it broke out in Camp Funston
Yeah.
at Fort Riley. And these are the old pictures you see of all the soldiers in the hospital
In the beds, yeah.
Yeah, but it had a low mortality. And then it got over into Brest, France, which was the major embarkation point for our soldiers in World War II. And it caused havoc. A lot of soldiers were sick. But
This is the
again,
second wave.
No, first wave.
First wave, okay.
Still a very low death rate. And then it seemed to disappear. And this was noted. Communications aren't the same
Right.
now as they were back then. And the disease seemed to get milder and milder. And it seemed to be going away. And then, boom. Something happened over there. And it got lethal. Well, we're shipping soldiers back, not just to
Right.
the front, but back. And Boston got a...
This is
Philadelphia,
so,
too.
So the second wave is when they come back home
It's
after
coming back.
the armistice in 1918.
No, there was still war going on.
Okay. Oh, it's still shipping back in.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you go over, you do
Right,
your tour, you
right.
come back, and then they sort of missed the change, and then reports were coming from the battlefield into medical that no, some of these soldiers are dying like really quickly, and they're turning cyanotic, they're turning purple from buildup of carbon dioxide, and more increasing high mortality. And the War Office back here is trying to figure out, well, a small number of reports, we'll ignore it. And about this time, Wilson became his divine inspiration that the U.S. had to crush the Germans.
Right.
And we were shipping 10,000 soldiers a day.
Well, the Russian Revolution had taken
And
place, and the Russians were out of the war. The Germans could hold on forever, so that's why the only thing that could break them was the American military might. Other than that, you'd had a stalemate for 50 years.
Yes, sir. And it was
and that's why we ramped up.
Yeah. And it got out of control. Boston got it. And then Philadelphia.
And out of control means, what's your definition of out of control? What happened in those places?
What we're seeing in China. Rapid spread with some deaths. And some quick deaths. Not drawn out, prolonged.
Like in
But-
one day.
Yeah.
Well, later on, from the time of cough
Because the
until
virus
death,
mutates and
Yes,
becomes
sir.
more and more powerful. How does that happen, and how does that fall into a third wave?
third wave, the second wave was the killer. That swept the world, and it was limited by the transportation of the time. Lindbergh still had not done his transatlantic crossing. That would be 9 years later.
Right.
But it would spread by steamship and steam train, locomotive. That's how most long-distance travel was done back then. So even though we're talking, I don't want to say primitive forces of travel, but very slow forces of travel, not like today where you can be 24 hours on the other side of the world. It still became pandemic, swept the world,
So
killed.
this was, and what did it kill? Because this is the third great plague in man's history. 100 years ago,
Yeah.
basically 100 years ago, the third great plague to start the 20th century kills how many people?
50, arguably to 100 million people. Now you remember our population was half what it is now.
So 50 million to
Right.
100 million globally.
Yeah.
How many in the United States died?
At that time,
What's the estimate we have? 5 million or?
I can't remember.
Yeah. We'll have to
I've
pull
got
that.
too many figures up here.
Let's pull that. And so this was absolutely horrific. In fact,
Horrific.
my dad's 98 years old. You still talk to people. We had somebody calling the other day. The grandparents, daughter, his, I think, grandfather's kid sister
Yeah.
at 2 years old had died in West Virginia. Right. So this thing was a global pandemic.
Whole families died. Philadelphia,
How did it burn?
Was the worst.
How did it burn itself out?
the virus changed, and people got so frightened they avoided contact with each other.
How bad was Philadelphia?
Overall, if you look at the statistics, yeah, but you need to look at where the statistics occurred. The biggest, the Hog Shipyard
Yep.
was the largest shipyard in the world. I think they had 30,000 employees. And it broke out in a few soldiers and got into the shipyard and then went apocalyptic.
I want to also mention something before we go to break here. We got a break coming up, but we got Dr. Stephen Hatfill, formerly senior researcher at the biodefense researcher at the U.S. Army's Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, and that is the Pros from Dover, as we call it. You've got a chart in the book. The book is 3 seconds until midnight. Dr. Hatfill is one of the world's experts on this. You've got a book that does the timeline of from 1918 forward, but around 1990. All of a sudden, because you have from 1918 from the Spanish influenza or the Haskell, Kansas influenza, we not much happens, or some things happen, but they're all covered. Then around 1990, there's an explosion. There's like 7 or 8 of these things start to pop up.
Yeah.
And you said yesterday in the show, one of the reasons we want to get you back, something happened around 1990 in the world. We got about 30 seconds to tee it up for the next one. Why is 1990 such an important date when you look at these plagues?
This is when generally start to see an increase in the number of new, previously unknown infectious diseases, jumping, usually viruses, RNA viruses for certain reasons, jumping from animals into man. And these are virgin populations for the virus. It's not easy to be an animal virus and live in a human being. There's temperatures, there's pH conditions, there's all sorts of physiological things. But if the virus learns to do that, then it's game on.
Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a short commercial break. When we return here on War Room Pandemic, Jack Max is going to get us up to date on all the breaking news. By the way, with our website, pandemicwarroom.org, you got to go to 24 hours a day. We've got all the information as an information center in the Wuhan pandemic coming out of China. We're going to get to Dr. Hatfill. We're going to talk about specifically how the Spanish influenza relates to what we're doing today. We also got Dr. Bradley Thayer is going to call in about the Chernobyl of this global pandemic. Back in a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to episode 5. We're live on Capitol Hill in the War Room. And this is War Room Pandemic. Our music we just cut to return, that is a BBC reporter reporting on the speech that President Xi of China gave the other day, where he called this virus a demon, a devil, that is now inside of China. The Wuhan pandemic is what we're talking about, and we're here with Dr. Hatfill, Stephen Hatfill from George Washington University, he's an adjunct professor, Department of Immunology?
Close enough.
Close enough, in microbiology. Formerly a biodefense researcher at the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. And that, ladies and gentlemen, are where the professionals are, the top people, not just in our nation, but in the world. I want to get back to Dr. Hatfill in a second. I'm going to go to Jack Maxey. Dr. Hatfill, on the analogy of the great third plague of mankind, the influenza, this what we call the Spanish flu of 1918, it killed 675,000 people at the time, and the nation's, I think, was around 100 million, 120 million. It would have been, if you make the analogy today that you do in the book, I think it'd be 1.2 to 1.5 million people would die today in the United States if you had the same level of intensity as 1918. But you're saying that, and you compare the beds you would need, you do, so what are some of the statistics? I know you got a chart in here.
That's horrendous. We would need a 200% increase in general hospital beds. These are people that can't be nursed at home. We would need a 400% increase in the number of ventilators and ICU beds. Now, our national stockpile does address this to some degree, but we're still going to be short of ventilators if an all-out thing comes.
We'll get into the whole thing about are we prepared and how the preparation is, but I want to go to Jack Maxey. By the way, on CNBC, one of the things we're trying to do here on Pandemic, that's where we got Dr. Hatfield and other people, and Dr. Bradley Thayer in a second, is actually people who understand China and they'll also understand the disease, right? Understand these viruses. If you combine those two, because there's been so much misinformation and quite frankly, people back on their feet, it's not acceptable that we allowed the Chinese to lie to us and misrepresent this from December to the middle of January, right? Just not acceptable. Now, Jim Cramer is on CNBC as we're doing the show, and they are lighting up the administration for not being fast enough on this, not being quick enough on this, not stopping these planes coming in from the airports. And I realized during the Ebola thing, there's all these political issues about, do you stop people from coming in? But right now, we're seeing this thing spread to places where people are coming out of China. And this is not about the Chinese people. They're the most decent, hardworking people on earth, but their government, right, this collection of gangsters that the Chinese Communist Party never tell you the truth. They're not worried about their population. And, right now they have tried to quarantine almost 90 million people in central China. This Wuhan, the city of Wuhan, which nobody even knew Wuhan, even China hands weren't that focused on Wuhan until a couple of weeks ago. Wuhan is greater and bigger than New York City, has more people than New York City, right now in the city of Wuhan, and this is not about Golden Week. Golden Week's where all the Chinese go back home. They're very traditional, very family oriented. The biggest week of the year for them is where they all go home and collect, and they have their dinners together, and they toast, and they talk with ancestors. They go back to the cemeteries where people are buried. It's a fantastic thing, but the Wuhan is missing 5 million people have left Wuhan at the minimum, 5 million, and they did not go. Wuhan is kind of the place people go back to, right? It's the Pittsburgh of China on the Yangtze River. It is a communication in the globalization project. Wuhan has been the center of the logistics change. Wuhan is where both communications and really the rail, all the logistics kind of come out of Wuhan. And to me, and I don't want to, we'll get into this and maybe tomorrow's show with Dr. Hatfill, we're trying to do a special on Saturday to talk about, just so happens, and I'm not a guy, I'm not a conspiracy theory, everybody knows this, I don't wear a tinfoil hat, I keep saying the party of Davos is in your face, right? The way they do this, the way the world works is in your grill. They don't hide it. I'm just saying the Dr. Hatfield and the guys of the Army, the most sophisticated people in the world have these what they call level 4 research facilities to study this, which are high and tight here in the United States. Dr. Hatfield on the show the other day reported from one of those. He was up there. There's a level 4. The only one in China happens to be in Wuhan. The only one in China, I think, is a mile from the market. Just saying. Okay, no, Bill Gertz is reporting on this, and the Washington Post is lighting up Bill Gertz. Right, the Washington Post, owned by Jeff Bezos, who's also a partner of the South China Morning Post, which is owned by Jack Ma. Hey, just saying, Alibaba and Amazon. Hey, I'm just throwing these things out there. Right, there are no coincidences in the world. There are none. Want to go to Jack? What is the news coming out today? The breaking news of where we stand with this.
Well, I think what's really incredible is the way this is accelerating. Yesterday morning when we spoke, there were 6,400 confirmed infected. Now, this is always going to be a low number because they're only reporting people who've had the laboratory tests, and they don't have enough test kits. There were 133 dead this morning, 7,800 sick, 170 dead. So we're seeing it accelerate, and I think what's really frightening, we talked
2 days ago, we did the show. When we started the show, there were 15 dead on Saturday, right? Today, there's 170.
Yes.
Those numbers are always lagging. And
Yes.
first off, the calculations we know are not correct because some people are dying of other things, and they're not counting that, okay? All the numbers are on the low side, okay? Hong Kong University, the Harvard of South China, comes out with their analysis the other day and says, hey, as a base, they're doing their extrapolation. Their base is 44,000 people have it, right? Not the official government statistic
well,
of
this is
7,800.
44,000 last Saturday.
Saturday, but here's the thing: last Saturday, the only thing I'm saying is just the last couple of days when they reported 102 on today's Thursday show. We had 102 on Tuesday. We had 132 yesterday. We got 170 today.
Right.
Okay, so you can just see the trend. Also, what else and where's it going throughout the world?
Also, what I think is really frightening, they just announced last night that a Indian student who was studying in China has returned to his home city in Kerala in southern India and is positive with the infection.
If you had listened to the show yesterday, Maura Monahan, who's an expert in this area from Radio Free Asia, Daniel Patrick Monahan's daughter, told us everything about Thailand, everything about India, everything about Tibet. It's all coming there. They know it's coming there, and they're scared to death because they think it could explode given the density of the population and the lack of public health care infrastructure. This is the thing about the Spanish influenza. The number of beds, if you extrapolate out what you would need, the number of beds, the infrastructure we have here in the United States, with Europe and the United States, the most sophisticated in the world, and guess what? We ain't not even close to being ready, right? You look at China, you look at India, absolutely no chance that they're ready.
And the big thing that makes this so much different than SARS, and I think we have to look at this, let's say they were exactly the same in terms of fatality, in terms of their RO number. China is different. We have hundreds of thousands of Chinese nationals in Africa throughout
One
the
Belt, One
stands,
Road.
One Belt, One Road. We have in Africa 70,000 students studying in China, coming back and forth. It's literally a
By the way,
different world.
the lack of science training in this country is absurd and disgusting, and hopefully one of the good things from this changes it. The lack of sophistication I've seen on CNN and others, we're going to get up on the site, the not understanding of even how to do the math on death rates. They're taking death rates like current things versus that. To have that by the CNN producers, and CNN, MSNBC, you got to step your game up, okay? This is a crisis, okay? It's a crisis in China. And, when China sneezes, the world catches a cold now because of globalization, right? This is why it's got to get sophisticated. Some of the lack and immaturity of the analysis that's put up on the screen is just dead wrong. The math is just wrong. We're going to get to that later. I want to go, before we get Dr. Thayer on here, I want to go back to Jack's analysis of SARS. Compare this to SARS right now, or where it stands in China.
With respect to infection rates and expansion,
Yes, all of it. But
it's totally more than SARS. SARS had a 10% roughly death rate. It's a different virus. Although it's a coronavirus, these things are all different. They're in, you might think of strains of the virus. And there's strains that are constantly changing. SARS disappeared after its outbreak. It went extinct. It's lurking out there somewhere.
Right.
But we don't know. This virus is still up and coming, and it's still changing. Every time it replicates, it's going to make a little mistake in the blueprints. And it's searching. It's an evolutionary advantage for the virus. It's searching for the ideal host and the ideal conditions, because all it wants to do is replicate.
The things that you said in 1990, by the way, we're bringing up Dr. Bradley Thayer in a moment. You said in 1990 something changed. Is what changed is the density of these now urban populations or centers with all the animals and live animals and everything kind of mixed up together?
If we look globally at the number of new infectious disease, it's called emerging infectious disease. And we look at the numbers and we graph these year by year, new outbreaks, things we've never seen before. My goodness, it's starting to do that. And it seemed to start around 1995. I believe that we've crossed some sort of a threshold with respect to our population density. And keep in mind, no other species of large mammal, has ever approached our population densities that we have today. We are all living in a global biological experiment, and we don't know how it's going to turn out.
Wow.
This is not a good indication.
Okay, I want to now bring in Dr. Bradley Thayer. He is the author of an amazing book, How China Looks at the World. He's one of the top experts in the Chinese Communist Party and how they roll. He wrote a piece that we were able to preview on this show on our very first episode on Saturday. It was about how this pandemic is China's biological Chernobyl. Dr. Thayer, thank you for joining us, sir.
Good morning, Steve.
So walk us through where you think we stand today. The CCP now, very different than last Saturday where it was, not taking any responsibility the night before. Last Saturday was Lunar New Year, the day of. In the lead up to that, CCTV had I think, total of 30 seconds on there where President Xi, the new emperor, was, giving his greetings for the new year, etc. Things have changed somewhat in that now there's heads on pikes. The officials, the local officials, and this is exactly, if you saw the HBO thing on Chernobyl, this is exactly how it rolled. The local guys all ended up in prison or in Siberia, right? And the local guys in Wuhan have now all officially tendered their resignations and apologized to the nation for not being on top of it, right?
That's right. And I would just say this, that a lot of truth about governments and forms of government can be revealed in a crisis. So the continuing and ever worsening effects of this epidemic in China and now the world reveals some very unsettling and stark political facts about the true nature of the regime, how the country is really run, how it causes a challenging problem, like an epidemic, to become a global catastrophe. And so the points are these. First, the incompetence and cover-up are symptoms of a Leninist Soviet Chinese Communist Party style of government, where the regime is unable to address the problem because to do so threatens the legitimacy of the regime. So as you said, in 1986, the Chernobyl disaster, that was a masterclass of Soviet incompetence and cover-up. The local officials were aware of that failure or problems will lead to their sacking, right, at best, or worse outcomes. So they suppress negative information, and they deceive. Everybody knows this, they participated, everyone knows how the game is played. But that has unforgivable consequences in this case. And China's political system has really been laid bare by this. So the CCP has to suppress information, truth, because failure or disasters threaten the legitimacy of the regime, which cannot be seen to fail. right? So it's a dictatorship that rules as omniscient and unassailable for the workers and peasants of China, right, according to their ideology. And it can only respond in a Soviet heavy-handed manner, right? So that would be stopping movement or attempting to, building new hospitals, firing lower-level officials. But what's inherent here is that the style of government, the communist government itself, ensures that these measures are going to fail because of endemic corruption, which is caused by the government. Additionally, the lies and deceit of the regime threaten legitimacy, and they compel the regime to continue to lie because they cannot accept fault for the horrific consequences which their outcomes have caused, right? So few people believe the lies, but they can't overthrow the government. But it's important to recognize, too, that this may be changing. This could be a catalytic event. It could be like the increase of the price of bread in Paris in 1789, right, before the French Revolution, or the Tsarist government firing on protesters, right, or the unrest in 1917 before the Bolshevik Revolution. It was just one more lie, one more event on a heap of lies that finally causes the collapse. I would also add, importantly, that fear of an epidemic concentrates the mind, right? It compels media attention to the failings and the true nature of the regime for most Chinese people, of course, and also for outside actors, in a way that other events, which are also occurring simultaneously, right? The wide-scale human rights abuses, the suppression of freedoms, putting Muslims in re-education camps, right, for the Uyghurs and Kazakhs. They also are very revealing about the truth of the regime, but they haven't compelled a similar level of response. So, or decades of cheating on trade agreements, Steve, I know you follow that very closely, of course, and the rules and norms of global trade regime, they violate.
So I wanted to talk about how we interact. I also want to make a point, 2 points. Is that number one of the reasons they were so headlong into do this deal, the phase one deal that we just signed, is that, and to do the purchases, 50%, this is a nation that lives on pork, 50% of their hog population, and the Chinese as a people are very frugal, very practical. Remember, they've come through 100 and some years, historically, thousands of years, famines all the time, having food, having proper food, everything is a sign of not just wealth, but it's a sign of that your family's got its act together. They ain't killing hogs unless they have to kill it, to eat it. 50% of their hog population was slaughtered in the summer, in early fall of 2019. The professor at the Bloomberg School of Global Health, I think at Johns Hopkins University, which is one of the finest in the world, Dr. Tenner, who did the analysis actually driven by, I think, interest in the hog problem they had there, but he did the analysis off of this virus, same virus, but set it in Brazil in a hog farm, right, the way it started. His analysis, we have on the site, killed, and the headline is 65 million people died in the pandemic. That's it. But more importantly, as he says, that wasn't the worst news. The worst news was the collapse of the global economy that led to anarchy and to chaos. I want to now return. These Chinese Communist Party came to the White House 10 days ago, right? 10 days ago to sign the phase one, never, ever, ever, ever any heads up of what the crisis that they knew they had going on in central China and Wuhan. I want to make sure everybody looks at that ceremony and how they sat there, never gave a heads up, never gave any acknowledgement. These people had lied and suppressed this information, okay, coming out of China. They blew off the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization went over there the other day when everybody's on them about you got to call this an emergency. Finally went over and kowtowed to Xi again in some happy talk situation. Now they're finally getting their act together. They suppress this information. So I want to ask you, any number, Dr. Thayer, you know the Chinese Communist Party better than anybody. The math we're seeing and what we're seeing coming out of Wuhan that they are reporting, what do you think the reality on the ground is, and how should the world, the United States government and others, interact and interface? They finally have accepted U.S. team to go over, right, as of yesterday. They have turned down, President Trump offered, at least in the press reports, 3 different times he offered to send an American team. They have the guys like the Dr. Hatfills of the world, who are the world's experts in this, all turned down, right? Finally, so how should people think about how the Chinese Communist Party is running this right now, and how should the world's governments interact with them?
Well, they should expect that what we did with the Soviets, right, with Chernobyl, is that the Chinese Communist Party is going to lie about this. The situation on the ground is orders of magnitude worse than what they're going to say. as your other guests have observed. The situation is far more worse. So deceit and lies are what's going to be coming out of the Communist Party of China, and governments around the world need to recognize this, which is why this crisis, as bad as it is also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to call attention to the true nature of the government of China, the Communist Party of China. It's very important, right, for the American elite who may not be familiar with the regime or its true nature, who see it in a benign light, right, as a trading partner, as an actor with whom we can have win-win solutions. We can recall Mike Bloomberg, right, saying that Xi was not a dictator. This opportunity, this crisis, this epidemic allows us to really see the regime as it is, and for media and for global elites and for other governments to call attention to that. Steve, it's critically important to recognize that China has the pretense. They see them as leading a global governance movement superior to Western democracies, for example. But this crisis illuminates that their governing model has failed miserably. And anybody who advances or supports their governing model in South Asia, for example, with Pakistan, or in Africa, is going to have to recognize that the governing model is one which is a disaster. It is one which suppresses information, it suppresses its failing, and the only solution to that is really to expand democracy, right? The only solution to that is to really recognize what we have done, which is to create a society where greater freedoms and truth, actually, about crises when they develop are disseminated, rather than trying to suppress it and cover it up.
Dr. Thayer, we appreciate it. This is fantastic. How do people, do you have a Twitter handle? How do people get more access to your writings and to your understandings?
Yes, we tweet at Thayer and Han. So my last name, Thayer, and Han, Han, who's often my co-author, Liao Chan Han.
Fantastic.
We tweeted that.
Okay, we're going to get your article back up again. Thank you, Dr. Bradley Thayer, the author of How China Sees the World, and about the new article on the Hill, how this biological pandemic is the Chernobyl of the Chinese Communist Party. Before we get about a minute left, what should people, you think, should be looking for? If you're at your home, going to your office in the United States, what should people be focused on as far as news, et cetera? What should be the focus of, if concerned citizens want to get on top of this, what should they be looking at?
Using national broadcast media is, you can't believe what's
Why are
going out there.
Why are they so far behind? Why is the mainstream media so far behind this? Why are we doing this on Capitol Hill, taking an hour away from our impeachment show to do this? Why has it come to this?
I think they're just trying to make as much money as possible for the least amount of
I'm
effort.
shocked about how lazy and dumb they are. The numbers they have up there are just not even mathematically correct. This is does anybody at CNN produce these shows anymore? It's outrageous and stupid. Okay, Stephen K. Bannon, we're going to be back at 5 o'clock with the impeachment, another day of the questions, which are very illuminating. We're going to try to get Dr. Hatfill back here tomorrow. The book is 3 seconds until midnight. It is like, if you've ever read Stephen King's The Stand back in the 1980s, this is the real-life version of it, okay? This is, realize King was quite prophetic. The book you want to read, the movie's The Contagion, the book is The Stand, and now 3 seconds to midnight. Dr. Stephen Hatfill, one of the great experts in the world, Jack Maxey, who's going to be all day long. Go to Pandemic, War Room, pandemic.warroom.org to get all the information. 24, we've got a live blog going on there. We'll be back today at 5 o'clock, and then back tomorrow at 10 o'clock with War Room Pandemic.